Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4 of Not the Worsted Knitting Podcast. My name is Michelle and I am the knitter and knitwear designer behind Mishi Fraz Knits. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for joining me today if you're new or returning. I've got a few new faces here. My last video where I did a roundup of my most and least worn summer garments, it brought a lot of new viewers in, which is really exciting. So if you're here from that, thank you so much and welcome. I had a lot of really great comments about the different tops that I showed off. A lot of people that were really helpful talking about the yarns and the color choices that I picked. And there were a couple of notes that I wanted to touch on just based on some of the comments that I got. I know that as my list progressed, I started from my most recent knit and I went all the way through to my oldest knits. And you can kind of see the progression of things that I would change more with some of my older knits. But I want to mention that I'm not upset about that or disappointed. What I love about knitting and the whole knitting process is the fact that it's kind of an iterative approach. With each garment that you make, you learn a little bit more about your preferences, how things fit you, yarns you like, and not even just yarns that you like, but yarns you like to work with, how the yarns feel when you work with them versus how they feel once they're blocked, and just general comfort level. And the thing about knitting is it's a slow hobby, it's a slow burn. So you can't just go to the store, pick your yarn, pick your pattern, knit a swatch, and automatically know for certain, like, this is gonna fit great, this is gonna feel great, I'm gonna love this. Like, a lot of times you really just need to see it through, or at least see a large portion of it through to know whether or not something is working. And for me, a lot of times I really like to complete the whole thing and wear it before I really know how something is going to work with me and how often I'm going to use it in my wardrobe. And what I find so great about this, like, I know that that can seem a little bit daunting, especially for somebody really new to the hobby, but I think the best example I can use is before I started knitting garments for myself, when I would go shopping and I'd go to the store and pick up a sweater, you know, a lot of times I would pick a sweater that I loved, like I'd love the color or the pattern that was on it. There would always be something that I didn't love, like either it would be a little too long or the sleeves were maybe a little too short or whatever the case may be. You know, if you're like me, it's hard to find exactly something that fits you perfectly, that you love 100% without thinking about how you could tweak it. And maybe that's just part of how it is when you want to make your own garments, is that you look at things a little bit differently from that kind of perspective. But what I love about being able to make my own garments is that I can look at those flaws, and I say flaws loosely because they're not bad. They're just things that you might think about something that you're wearing and think, well, I like this, but would I like it more if it was, you know, tucked in a little more at the waist or a little shorter, a little longer, etc. And so as I've knit more and more garments, I've learned more about not only my body type, but my preferences that I didn't even realize that I had. I feel like there's so many things that I thought I would like, and then when I knit them and put them on my body, it's fine, but it's not what I'm reaching for. And some of the things I'm reaching for are not the items that I ever thought I would love on my body. And so I think it kind of goes hand in hand with that comfort level. Also, part of it might be too that now that I work from home instead of being in an office, that changes things a lot too. So it really shows how your preferences change just depending on your lifestyle, because where I would often go for more form-fitting, not like cropped, but like at the waist sort of garments, now I reach for a lot more drapey, boxy, oversized fits. But if I'm going out somewhere nice, I will still go for more of a fitted look. So the preferences change depending on what you're doing and where you're going. And that's what I really liked about kind of doing a retrospective of my knits, is seeing all of these different things and what I've learned. Like, every single one of those knits is a lesson learned. And even a couple of the ones that I really don't wear, I have no desire to get rid of them because I love to look at them and think to myself, well, this is when I learned that this color really doesn't work for me, or maybe linen yarn isn't for me, or maybe this linen yarn isn't for me. Like, they're all really great lessons. And so I still look at that as largely a positive. And I think just in general, summer knits, I think I'm a little bit more experimental with my summer knits, which can backfire sometimes because I'm using yarns that I know maybe a little less about or that I wouldn't normally be drawn to. And for me, I have to see it through, I have to knit it up, I have to block it, I need to wear it and see, do I like this, do I not like it? Because hanger appeal is not always the same as how it looks and feels on your body. And I feel like the feeling of it on your body is so important and so fundamental in the yarn that you pick. And feeling a yarn at the store is never going to be the same as how it feels once you've knitted it into a fabric and blocked it and then wear it on your body. And over time, how that might change, how wearing it more will change it, how washing and blocking it can change it. So all of those things I just think are great lessons. And so I hope that you took that from my video. I hope that it was more of lessons learned. And again, thank you so much for all your comments. I'm still trying to catch up on all of them. I'm trying to respond to them as I can, but you guys have been so great and so welcoming, and I really appreciate it. So enough about that. Why don't we go ahead and kind of talk about what we'll be chatting about in today's video. I will start by talking about what I'm wearing. So if you watched my last video, you will note that I made a comment that I was so excited to break out my summer knits because it was finally warm and sunny in Western Washington. If you live in the Pacific Northwest, I apologize because I put that out into the universe and now we have a week of rain and chilly weather. But with that, that means I could break out some of my more cozy sweaters, which I have a lot of and I'm very excited to share with you. So today's cozy sweater for this semi-cloudy, semi-sunny day is my Wool and Honey sweater by Andrea Mowry. So I'm gonna get up for a second so you can see the best part about this sweater, which is this beautiful circular yoke. Look at that. Look at how beautiful that is. All right, so I'm gonna back up a little bit and look at my notes to talk a little bit about the pattern. This is a top-down yoke, and it's just a series of, God, I can't remember the exact name. Maybe if I'll look it up and write down what it's called if she has a specific name for it, but it's essentially dropped slip stitches where you're pulling a little, it's like a double yarn over, I believe, and then you're slipping them for a few rows to achieve this elongated, I think it's an elongated drop stitch or something like that. Again, I'll write it in the notes. But you do this in a way to where it makes this beautiful honeycomb shape, which is, I mean, it's just phenomenal. This is knit in Brooklyn Tweed Loft in the colorway Embers. This is one of the few patterns I've knit where I loved her sample so much. I knit it exactly to pattern, exactly like the same yarn she used is what I used. I just thought it was the perfect color for this motif. Like there was nothing I looked at that I thought worked better, so I just went with it. Here is the yarn. And I will pull out the tag for you so you can see. And this is an American Targhee Columbia wool, fingering weight, and it's 270 yards per skein. I used her recommended needle sizes, which were US 3 or 3.25 millimeters and US 4 or 3.5 millimeters. I believe, the smaller needle was just for the ribbing, larger needle for the body. And I did the smallest size. I ended up using a little bit more yarn than she recommended, but that is also because I elongated it by 3 inches. So this is meant to be very boxy and very cropped. I added an extra 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters to the length so that it wouldn't be quite so cropped. But I did knit the smallest size purposely because this is meant to be quite a big boxy sweater. I believe it's meant to have 10 inches of positive ease. I believe that's how much. So it's meant to be quite loose and drapey. The pattern size range, it ranges between 39 inches to 63 inches in bust, and that is 99 to 160 centimeters. Oh, there's Bagel. Bagel's popping in to say hi and potentially get into trouble. And yeah, when I was looking at the finished photos, this was I knit this, I think like 4 years ago now. And at the time, I was actually still really nervous at the idea of oversized sweaters. I've mentioned before, so I am a 34-inch bust, and I've got quite large hips. And so the idea of large boxy sweaters has always been something that I've shied away from, just because I was always afraid at how that would make me look. But this one, I didn't want to deviate from the pattern at all, especially because it's quite intricate. So as you can see here, you know, this detail is very intricate on the yoke, and it's very important that you follow that. So I didn't really want to do any modifications. I wanted to knit it as written and see how I liked it. And I'll admit, when I first finished this, I was like, ooh, is this too big on me? Is this wider than I'm comfortable with? But I gotta tell you, I love this sweater. Like, I love to wear this sweater. I reach for it every time it starts to get a little cloudy or chilly. This is my go-to. And I think part of that actually is the sleeves. I mean, it's one of many things. It's drapey and open and comfortable, and I don't feel like I'm constricted, but it also has these, I guess it's probably 3/4 length. It's just past the elbow by a bit, and I love that. Like, you've got a little bit of room in the sleeves. They're not too tight, but they're also not super wide, and it hits right at the elbow, so I never feel like I actually have to like push my sleeves up, which I find I do all the time. Like, I run warm just generally. In the winter, I have to make sure my sweaters aren't too hot, or if they are, like, I'm not wearing a jacket, because I get so hot when I'm wearing these. But this one regulates temperature really well. In addition to the fact that it's got 3/4 length sleeves that help with that, I also think the yarn plays a role in this. So as I mentioned, this is Brooklyn Tweed Loft, and this is a woolen spun yarn. And I won't go crazy in depth with the difference between woolen spun and worsted spun, but I will say, so a woolen spun yarn, it's loftier and it actually has air trapped in it. They said it's comprised of 2 single plies gently twisted together to create a 2-ply yarn. It's a really, I mean, lofty, like, it's the perfect name for it. It's a quite lofty, springy, bouncy yarn, and it's weirdly rustic without being scratchy. And I know that's a really weird description, but I wouldn't call this soft yarn, but I also wouldn't call it rough yarn. Like, it clearly has a texture, and it's more rough than soft, but it's not itchy. Like, it doesn't make me itchy at all. I don't find it scratchy. There are no hairs or fibers sticking out of it that are irritating to me. And I'm quite sensitive to things like mohair, or even some alpaca yarns. If I'm hot, that alpaca I'll just feel it poking on my chest, and it's not comfortable. But this, I'm wearing this next to skin. I'm not even wearing a tank top or anything underneath this, and I'm very comfortable. It just does such a good job of regulating temperature. And so I found a really interesting link from Brooklyn Tweed where they discuss the differences between woolen spun and worsted spun. And I'm going to add that link below in the show notes, just because I was fascinated reading it, and I just thought, you know, anybody who's really interested in the yarn might want to read it too, and they'll summarize this better than I can. But I do recommend this yarn. I used, if I didn't say already, for the smallest size on this, I used 5.25 skeins, which is about 1,444 yards. And yeah, I think I actually would have been pretty much bang on with her recommended yardage if I hadn't added that extra length on the bottom. But I'm really happy I did. So hers fits quite short and boxy. And if you watch Andrea Mowry's podcast, which you should, it's amazing. She's talked about how she likes her tops a little bit shorter and boxier just based on her preferences for her body type. And I love it. It's a bit big in the back, so I'm gonna spin around in a second and I'll probably actually add some B-roll footage for you to see how it looks. It does have a bit extra in the back, but honestly, I love this sweater so much, I can kind of see past it. So I'm gonna turn around really quick so you can see. Yeah, a little bit big in the back. We'll see how that footage does. I might just cut that out and put in B-roll of this. This sweater was one of the sweaters I knit that actually really inspired me to design my own garments. I just, I always wanted to make my own garments and I wanted to be really creative with it. I've watched Project Runway for a million years and I've always had that dream in my mind of like, not necessarily being a fashion designer, but just, creating my own clothes, but also designing really interesting clothes and accessories for myself and anybody else who's interested. And when I went from knitting some garments for utility to knitting a garment like this, where, it's art. You can't deny that. There's just something so phenomenal about knitting something like this. I so appreciate the amount of hours that must have gone into planning this out for every size so that the honeycombs drape perfectly over the yoke for each size. And not just that, but even the smallest thing of her choosing to do garter stitch, which looks like a honeycomb. Like it's such a great design. Like it's beautiful. So I love this. I love the sweater. I always get compliments on it when I'm wearing it. How could you not? And yeah, there are yard people here, so I'm gonna have to pause this and I'll be back. All right, I am back. Sorry about that brief pause. We had to have some yard work done today and I thought they were showing up later, but the guys came to work on it right in the middle. So fortunately, that was actually a pretty good break in between me finishing up talking about my wool and honey and moving on to the next project that I've been working on, which is a sock. So this was actually kind of a random thing that happened. I wasn't expecting to work on this or chat about this, but I had knit my husband a pair of socks. These are the Prismatic Reflection socks by me, and he had picked out this yarn that he loved. When I told him to go into my stash of fingering weight yarn and pick out a yarn, he ended up picking out one of the few fingering weight yarns I have that was just 100% merino. And I was a little worried at first when he picked that out for me to knit him a pair of socks, but he really liked the color and he is much easier wearing on his socks than I am. So I kind of actually took this as a test to see if he would wear through his socks in the same way that I have previously worn out a pair of merino socks. And when I say merino socks, what I mean is the yarn is 100% merino. There is no nylon in it. So this yarn that I will be talking about, this is, what is this? This is Knerd String, fingering weight. There's the label. And it's 100% superwash merino, 400 yards, 100 grams, 2-ply yarn. And the colorway is Cherry Garcia. It's a beautiful, beautiful tonal yarn. It made beautiful socks, and you can see he's worn these a ton. This is actually his favorite pair of socks. So all things considered, I mean, I think he's probably gotten a good 15-ish wears out of this, maybe even more, because he wears them a lot. I've been washing these like twice a week. So all things considered, they've held up really well. This sock is actually in pretty good shape, but The other night we were getting ready for bed and I was in the other room putting stuff away, and from the other room I heard, "Oh no, Michelle." Like, legitimately I was worried something really bad had happened. And so I go running in there, and he was like a little bit sheepish to actually show me that he had gotten a hole in the heel of his sock. And I've actually got the heel right here. So you can see this sad little hole in this heel. But I thought this was such a really fun opportunity for me to chat a little bit about sock heels and the benefits of knitting an afterthought heel. So in my knitting patterns, including the prismatic reflection sock pattern, I typically include 2 heel options. These are my go-to heels. One heel option that I include is the shadow wrap heel, just because I personally love the way that that knits up and I love the way it fits. And then I also include the afterthought heel because it's, in my opinion, it's one of the easiest heels. Like, it literally is an afterthought. Like, you knit a tube, you go back, you add the heel in, and you don't really need to think about it. And it's knit in the same way as you would knit a toe. So the same way you add a toe in here is the same way you add a heel in. And it's the same exact construction, knit 2 togethers and SSKs for the decreases until you get the length and the width that you want, and then you Kitchener stitch it together. With that in mind, so he showed me the sock, and I have some photos, so I will probably pop the photos up so you can see what I mean. This hole was smack dab right in the middle of the Kitchener stitch. Like, right on the edge of that heel. I couldn't have asked him to get a hole in a better spot on a sock, honestly. Like, he has nowhere, anywhere else. Like, it's kind of remarkable. Everything else looks pretty great. And it was just smack dab right in the middle of the heel. So I was able to go in, I flipped the sock inside out, unpicked where I had woven in the end, and I was able to just rip back and then rip all of the attaching stitches where that first round you do of the afterthought heel. I just got my needle and I put my needle through each hole as I was ripping it back, and I placed the sock all the way back on my needle, and I basically just knit a new afterthought heel like it was the first time. And a few things I wanted to chat about with repairing a heel on a sock that is maybe a yarn that's not super hard wearing is this fun guy. So this is a spool of nylon thread. Now, truth be told, when he requested these socks on this yarn, I went straight to my local yarn store and bought the nylon, because I was thinking to myself, maybe I will just knit these socks held together with the strand of nylon the whole way. Then I was second guessing it a little bit, because I didn't know how comfortable that would be, if I'm being honest. Like, I didn't know if that would feel weird or feel a little rough. And I wasn't really sure if he would enjoy wearing the socks, and you would kind of lose the benefit of how soft and nice this yarn is. So I ended up not using the nylon, and I figured that this day was gonna come. And so I've just held on to this. I've had this on my bookshelf just waiting. And when he brought these to me, I just kind of laughed, because I knew it was time. So my Saturday project was to rip this out, get this on the needles again, and then I ended up knitting the heel with nylon held double. So I'm gonna move this a few ways. I don't know if you can see the nylon. It kind of looks glistening, almost like there's a stellina in the yarn. So if you see that, there we go, it kind of picked it up there. Yeah. If you see that little bit of shine, that is the nylon. And I'm gonna pull this off. You can definitely see where I've added the heel in. Like, you can see, I mean, part of it is, like I said, he's worn these socks a bunch. So he's really broken them in. They've loosened up quite a bit. So you can definitely see where the new heel is added, and you can feel it too. So the merino is obviously extremely soft. And then when you get down here, I wouldn't say that the nylon is rough. It actually feels much like one of your standard like sock yarns. I would say it feels like a 75-25. It has that same kind of medium rough texture, but not in an off-putting way. But you can actually feel it the most on the pickup row. And I think that's just because of how it bumps. It bumps up between the gauge, because obviously my new heel, it's much tighter right now than this that's loosened up. And on top of it being loosened up, this is now the yarn held with a nylon thread instead of just the yarn. So it's a much firmer gauge. But I found it really interesting to knit with this nylon. It was much thinner than I expected, which, I mean, of course, it needs to be really thin, but I guess I was still expecting it more almost like an embroidery thread, but it was honestly like knitting with hair. It was a little bit strange at first. I'm gonna see if it's so thin. Yeah, okay, it shows up. It's so thin. Like, it's so thin and it looks so much like hair that when I finished the sock and I was weaving in the ends, I was finishing up with weaving in the ends and I saw a hair and I just pulled it to try and pull it out of the sock, and it tugged the entire heel because it was actually the nylon. So does that, yeah, you can see I purposely didn't cut them yet. Yeah, there we go. Purposely didn't cut them yet, so you can see just what it looks like. Now, with that being said, it was a little tricky to knit with the nylon because it's so thin, it was impossible to see and quite slippery. When I first did this, I actually was hoping to film a little bit of a tutorial video of me ripping out the heel and placing in the new heel with the nylon, but the video of me trying to start the first row with the nylon was just me like this trying to see, and then all you could see in the video was like the top half. You couldn't even see what I was working on because I was just trying so hard to see it. And I realized that like if I film this video is gonna be like 3 hours long. So I figured I would chat about it here instead. I'll show some photos of the process as I did it. But yeah, so I just blocked these a couple days ago. And as you can see, obviously I still need to cut the ends, and I'm gonna have him try them out this week, hopefully. And I'm really curious to see how they feel on his foot, if they're rough at all. If he can really notice the nylon. I tried it on, but you know, obviously these are a little bit big for me. I actually didn't really notice a difference. I couldn't feel it, but I can't speak for them being worn and walked around in. So I want to see how he likes them. But overall, you know, really great that we can just rip out the heel, replace it with a new heel, and the sock is fine again. I don't have to throw the sock away. The sock isn't ruined. I don't have to darn it. Like my friend actually asked me if I was just gonna darn this, but honestly, the amount of work it would take to repair this area and darn it, I was like, it'll be easier for me to just rip this out completely and start over. And look at that. I don't know. It's like a fun little memento. I'm not gonna hold on to this forever. I just held on to it for the sake of the video, but I thought it was really fun to show. And this would work if you put a hole in your toe as well, because it's the same construction. You would just rip out to the beginning of the toe and then reknit it. And if you don't want to use nylon, like if this weirds you out and you know you don't want to deal with a different texture, you could also just put in a different yarn completely and be okay with having a contrast there, which I mean, probably would have been okay with this, but not really the vibe I was going for. So I really want to see how this wears. To that point, I'm also really curious. So his other one, the heel was still okay, but you could definitely see that it had worn down. So let's see how well that shows up. You can kind of see where it's a little bit lighter where he's worn it down. So I went ahead and reinforced this one with nylon. And, oh, is that in focus at all? maybe you can see. So I reinforced a little bit above the Kitchener stitch, through the Kitchener stitch, and a little bit below to about here. This, basically I did a rectangle where I reinforced this with nylon, and you can feel it, like, actually there's a couple little rough patches there, which I'm gonna see if I can fix. It was way more difficult to duplicate stitch in nylon than it was to just knit with the nylon. Where I felt like knitting with the nylon slowed me down a little bit, duplicate stitching nylon, oh my God, it took forever. It took forever because I couldn't see it. I couldn't see the thread. The thread kept falling off of my needle because it was so slippery, and I couldn't see what stitches I had already duplicate stitched or not. So I kept having to move to better light. I have the little, what is it, the Lumos light for my neck. And I kept like having to readjust those and like be right up on it to see like, okay, did I get that one? Is it shining in the light? But I think overall, I think I got all the stitches. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm hoping it won't feel super rough or uncomfortable for him. So we're gonna see. I'll report back. I think by my next video, he will probably have at least worn these once. And so I can report back on how these feel. And then from there, we'll see how long they last. Again, you know, like I said, this heel was already starting to wear down just a little bit. And so I'm curious how much that nylon is gonna help, or if it's gonna continue to still loosen up and fall apart over time. Now again, I don't mind redoing this one. If this ends up being a success, then there's always the chance that I will just rip out this heel completely and replace with a new heel. But time will tell on that. Again, it depends on how much more he wears them out. Fortunately, I think we're gonna be lucky in that I think he really just wears down the heels. So I don't think I need to worry about anywhere else. Which leads me to some other socks that are desperately in need of repair. These are mine, and these have already been repaired once. But fortunately, this is a toe, so I can rip it out and redo. These are my wildflower bloom socks. This was my first version, which I bought this yarn. I was really inspired by it to work with these colors. Again, this is 100% merino. I don't even think this is superwash. I think this is just merino. And in my mind at the time, I was curious that maybe it would felt before it would fall apart. That did not happen. Also though, I am really tough on my socks. Like, I don't know what it is, but the moment I put hand knit socks on, I just have to slide across the hardwood floors. I have to do it. I have to. I don't know. And I know I should be maybe a little bit nicer to my hand knits, but I mean, I'm making these to be worn and enjoyed, and if that's what brings me joy, I'm gonna do it. So anyway, you can see here, I did a shadow wrap heel on these. Thankfully, the heel is actually okay. So I've noticed that I actually wear my socks out at the ball of my foot. So clearly that's where I'm putting most of my pressure. And you can see where I have already repaired that. That is a little area that I darned. And then after I darned that, I wore them again and promptly popped a hole right in the big toe. And they have been sitting. I've actually just had them hanging up on my wall as a reminder, like, you need to fix these. And I've been avoiding it just because I'm kind of terrified to wear them, because I know the next time I do, they're going to fall apart. But now that I have the nylon, I think what I might do is rip out that toe and reinforce it with nylon, put that back in and see how it goes. The reason I bring that up is also because my other one, which I knit in lighter colors, is actually starting to wear here in the foot. And again, that was part of the reason why I put these off to the side. You can see where I had already darned a little area. and now it's a much larger area that needs to be fixed. So now what I think I might do, I think this is a little too worn away to just do nylon. So what I might actually do is duplicate stitch this with the yarn and the nylon and see how that fares. And then maybe these guys will actually be wearable again. For the record, because I don't think I said the yarn yet, I actually pulled them aside so I could chat about them. The yarn is quite beautiful, really, really nice natural yarn. I got this when I was visiting my dad back in Virginia, and this is, I'm looking at my notes. This is Flora and Fauna 4-ply sock yarn from Seaside Fiber Arts. And the light pink, this speckled beautiful light pink, is Lac, L-A-C, and this darker pink is Lac-Insect. And so I actually think, like I said, these are natural, these are naturally dyed, 100% merino wool. So I believe that these were dyed using, that one was some sort of insect. I don't really know what insect, but I mean, really stunning yarn. And, you know, holes aside, I thought they made really beautiful socks. Now, with that being said, I don't recommend that you use a yarn that doesn't have nylon or silk for socks, just because this is probably going to happen. But if you have a yarn that you absolutely love and you really want to use it for socks, maybe consider at the very least reinforcing the heels and toes with nylon. While I don't know if I will use another non-nylon based sock yarn for socks in the future, if I do, I will definitely at least reinforce the heels and toes with this, because, where did I put this? Especially if I had knit this all in one, I don't actually think it would be that obvious. I think it would be much less obvious if this was all knit at the same time. I think this is really just showing differences because it's brand new, untouched yarn, hasn't been worn and washed, you know, 20 times. So while I was a little bit nervous and skeptical of how the gauge would change, I think it's worth it to guarantee that you're not gonna rip holes through your socks after a couple of wears. So I just thought that was a little bit of a fun anecdote about the benefits of Afterthought heels and the benefits of maybe holding on to some nylon thread. Unfortunately, I don't know. I bought this months ago, like I said, when I first started knitting those socks, so I don't remember how much this is, but I'll try to look up the price. I don't think it was any more than like $6. If it was more than that, I'll put a note below and say what. But I just picked this up at my local yarn store, and I bet you could probably get this at any general craft store. So that kind of concludes all of the crazy projects that I've been working on. I'm gonna flip through my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything. I do have an announcement on the other socks that I had chatted about a couple videos ago, as well as a name. So I finally have a name for these socks. I am calling these the Siroc socks. And the word Siroc is from the word Sirocco, which means it is a hot and dusty wind that blows across the Mediterranean, and it causes these ripples in the sand. And the reason I went for that is just because as I've been working on these, that's all I keep thinking about is how it shows up less on the speckly one. It'll show up really well on the tonal one. This texture that it creates this beautiful ripple. And each one of these that I've knit, I just keep thinking of these ripples in the sand, and it was driving me crazy to think of a name, and I think this fits. So these are the Siroc socks, which I thought had kind of a fun ring to it as well. So we are going with that name, and when this video goes live, these should be ready and open for testing. So I am in the final stages of writing up this pattern as of like right now, today. My goal is, once I wrap this up, I am going to finish writing that pattern and get it over to my tech editor this afternoon. And then we'll go from there. Assuming there aren't any crazy changes that need to be made, then by Friday, when this goes live, then we should be ready to start testing. So if for whatever reason these are not ready for testing when I post this, I'll put a note below. But assuming that they are, there will be an application down below to apply to test for these. And for the test, you only ever need to knit one sock for me. Obviously, of course, for yourself, you know, it's fun to knit the pair, but for the sock, you just need to knit one, and that's enough to know whether or not yarn amounts are correct, if it fits you okay, etc. This one is an interesting one too. I'm really curious about how this is going to test, because I had to make some interesting modifications for the sizes. So when I do sock patterns, I typically do 4 standard sizes, and these are pretty standard across most socks. I do that purposely because I feel like a lot of people who knit socks kind of know their numbers and know what they go for typically. Like for me, I am pretty firmly a size medium, so I'm typically 64 stitches on a US 1, which is a 2.25 millimeter needle, and I'm a size 7, so I typically know the amount of rows I need to do before doing the toe or before adding the heel, depending on which direction. And I like to keep with those standard numbers as much as possible, just because I feel like that makes it a little bit easier to see the pattern and be like, okay, I know I need to knit this size. With this one though, this pattern is an 8-stitch repeat. And when I first tried to modify that to work with the 4 sizes, it was not working with the extra small and the large. Basically the 2 sizes that aren't easily divisible by 8. And what happened was, actually you can sort of see it, this was my test for the first one. You can kind of see what happens is that slip stitch went into the heel. And that's because I actually had to shift I shifted the stitch markers around to place the heel to try and keep it to where the stitch pattern didn't get too messed up. But that really bothered me. I really don't like the idea of having a slip stitch here in the heel. You're already pulling so much tension on that stitch. And being that it slipped for multiple rows, it was a lot of extra weight and tension to put on that stitch. And I really wasn't thrilled with that. So what I did was I modified it to where there's only 2 sets of stitch counts. And the way that you get the 4 different sizes is with different needle sizes. So I'm looking at my notes. With the 4 sizes, sizes 1 and 3 will use a US 1 needle, which is a 2.25 millimeter needle, to achieve their size. So for example, this is a size 3, which is now, for the purposes of this pattern, 80 stitches. But it's knit on a US 1 needle, which is 2.25 millimeters, to achieve that size. Now I should also mention, the reason you can get away with a US 1 or 2.25 millimeter needle is typically your standard sock needle size. But this pattern, because it has these slipped cables, it scrunches in quite a bit. It makes it a much tighter fit. So it shrinks it in widthwise, and it also shrinks it lengthwise. So the US 1 needle allows you to go with a larger amount of stitches than you normally would for that size. But by going down a needle size, you actually achieve about the same fit that you would with your standard amount of stitches, if that makes sense. So for sizes 1 and 3, they will use the smaller needle size and a larger amount of stitches. And then for sizes 2 and 4, these will actually use your typical stitch counts. So this is a size 2, which is 64 stitches, which is your typical size 2 amount of stitches. But I've gone up to a US 1.5 needle, which is a 2.5 millimeter needle. And that allows me to get the same fit by going up a needle size. What I'm curious about is if that amount of, that difference in size of needles is enough for everybody, or if it's gonna end up being tighter for some and if they'll need to go up an additional needle size. I don't think so, and obviously I've got the gauge written down, so as long as you achieve that gauge, you should be fine. On top of that, you know, these socks are, even with them being quote unquote tight, there's still stretch. It's not like there's no give. So they, you know, when I was finished knitting them, they still felt a little tight, but once I blocked them on a sock blocker, they blocked out perfectly. And I can show an example of that in one of my many knitting bags. This is my, oh my goodness, this is a mess is what it is. I've got my waste yarn from an Afterthought heel. Oof. Okay, this is the second one for this guy that I'm currently working on. And I mean, you probably can't tell too much, but it definitely seems a little tight right now, but it blocks out really well. This stitch pattern stretches quite nicely. And as long as you've got a sock blocker, I mean, yeah, look at that. There's plenty of stretch there. So really curious to see how this fits everybody's feet. I'm hoping people have the same results as I do, but that's why you test. So again, hoping to get this to my tech editor today and hoping that these will be ready for testing. And my testing application should be available as I'm saying this, and it'll be down in the show notes. One other thing to mention is that these are knit cuff down, and they include an Afterthought heel and a shadow wrap heel. So I will show both. These are both Afterthought heels. And then this guy, that's shadow wrap heel. And I think my earlier chat today is a good sales pitch on why Afterthought heels are good. But I also, even with me saying that, I will say if you're using a yarn that you know is durable and you're pretty comfortable that you're not gonna wear through your socks, I love the shadow wrap heel. I actually think this is my favorite, and I mentioned this in another video where I've been knitting a lot of Afterthought heels lately because I just want to get through the sock and I don't want to think about the heel, but I've taken the time in the last couple of patterns to work the shadow wrap heel, and I just really enjoy it. I think it fits really nicely too, and it works in a way to where you have to stop to do the heel and then you go back to your pattern. But that works really well when you're doing color work or a complex stitch pattern, because you don't have to worry about it being a mess when you go to pick up those stitches. It's just, you get to a stopping point, you work on your heel, and then you keep moving, and it's pretty seamless. So yeah, that is the update for my Siroc socks. I'm hoping I can hurry up and finish the pairs for all of these so I can take some photos, because as you can see right now, I have one of each of these just because I had to try. It was a lot of trial and error. You know, this was, like I mentioned before, this was meant to be a sock for my husband and it ended up fitting me. And so then I had to make a version for him where I modified the stitch numbers, and that worked for him. And so then I needed to make a new version for me with the modified needle size, and that's this one. So we got a bunch now, but this is great because I'm about to have a whole bunch of new socks to wear, which is never a bad thing. So yeah, I think that's going to conclude my video for today in terms of knitting chat. I've got a few other projects that I'm working on, but I feel like this is already going to be on the longer end for just a general podcast. A couple of I guess like personal, not personal, but like other non-knitting related things that I've done. I've really enjoyed watching podcasts where they talk about shows they're watching or books they're reading and just their general thoughts on it. I actually just a couple of nights ago finished the book The It Girl by Ruth Ware, and I really enjoyed that book. It was a fairly light read, like it's kind of like a murder mystery whodunit sort of book, and it takes place in Oxford while there's a bunch of people in college. The main girl she's sort of a fish out of water, and she gets taken in under the wing of this very well-known, very wealthy girl named April, and then, you know, problems happen. I'm not going to give away the plot, but I ended up enjoying it because where I thought it was turning into a predictable book, by the end it actually surprised me. It didn't end up being who I thought it was, even though halfway through I was annoyed because I thought it was this one person and I was like, man, it's so obvious, which it wasn't. And it was kind of fun because it worked out that it almost felt like an accidental sequel to the book I'd read before it, which is Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld. Truth be told, I did not like Prep. I did not enjoy that book. So it's a similar story in that it follows this girl who's going off to a prep school, and she's from the Midwest, and her family is not wealthy, but she's very successful in school, and she got accepted. She was one of the few, like, in the scholarship program to go to this very prestigious prep school in the Northeast. And the book covers all 4 years of her tenure at this school. And as much as I wanted to root for the main character, I just found her to be really irritating. And it's funny because when I started reading that book, I really was excited about it because it was this girl who's a fish out of water, who grew up not wealthy in a school where she doesn't fit in, where, you know, there's all these cliques and she's not part of it and she feels a little weird. Like, I felt like I could connect to that because that's very much how I felt going from middle school to high school. Like, I was transferred from a private school to a public school halfway through my 6th grade, and I was literally the most awkward kid you could think of as a 6th grader, like just so awkward. I was definitely more of an art kid and not into sports. And so I was really excited when I started reading Prep because I thought it was going to be about that and her growth and how she kind of grew into herself. But she just really got in her own way. And I don't know if part of that is that I'm too detached now from being an adolescent to where it's frustrating to me now as somebody who's been through that, or if it really is just that her character is maddening and frustrating and gets in her own way. I don't know. Anyway, those are the last couple of books that I've read. Like I said, The It Girl, I enjoyed it. Couple parts where it felt like it was a little longer than it needed to be, but overall, I really enjoyed the book. And next up, what I'm reading is, I didn't write it down, but I think it's called The Nantucket Hotel. And so far, I'm enjoying that one. It's like got a ghost story in it, which that's always fun. So yeah, that's what I'm reading right now, and that's pretty much what I've got going on. So if you have any questions about anything I've talked about or any of my patterns, please feel free to reach out to me. I am Mishifraz on Instagram and Ravelry. You can also find me at mishifraz@gmail.com, and my website is mishifrazknits.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.